All right, so here we are in Module 11, and we're going to be talking about worker well-being. So in this first part of this topic or module, we're going to start talking about stress and different models for understanding stress. Okay, so an event in the environment is a stressor, and our reaction is a stress reaction. Okay. Stress is the process where we perceive a stressor in the environment, we respond in a particular way. So stress is the process of reacting to a stressor. Okay? So stressors, when you perceive them as threats, then yeah, they can really harm us, right? But stressors don't have to be perceived as threats. I mean, stress doesn't have to be bad. Because look, stress is a good thing. It invigorates our lives. Life without stress would be boring. Okay, so clearly we need stresses in our lives. Otherwise, we would just sit on our butts and never do anything. Okay, so we can make reference to good stress. And so here's a version of the Yerkes-Dodson law. And so what you have here is at low levels of stress, performance is very low. But as stress levels increase, this is the good stuff. All right. When you go to take an exam, you should be feeling some level of stress. I mean, you shouldn't walk in feeling, I got this in the bag. No, you should be feeling a little bit of stress. But clearly there's going to be a point here where the amount of stress you feel is in fact harming your performance. And so, of course, over in here we have test anxiety. Okay? So stress is not bad. It's good for us. It motivates us. It gets us moving. Walter Cannon was a physiologist who figured out that stress was really highly related to cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that you'll find in the bloodstream released by the adrenal glands. And so what happens is in the presence of cortisol, the body does a variety of physiological responses that Walter Cannon called the fight or flight response. And so in the face of a stressor, the body's sympathetic nervous system will increase the heart rate, increase the breathing. It will divert energy away from non-essential places. It'll do a lot of different stuff, okay? And do things to get you ready to fight or run away from whatever the stressor is. And what happens is that in the face of what we call acute stress, that is, there is a single event. A bear jumps out in front of you. Blah. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, the fight or flight mode goes on, and you deal with the bear. Okay, hopefully you run away. Don't try to fight a bear. He'll kick your you-know-what. But unfortunately, the modern world, in particular, the modern world of work, is filled with chronic stress. That is, stressors that just keep coming and coming and coming. And so what happens is in the modern world, especially people that work in the modern world, that their body is in a constant state of fight or flight. And the body can't afford that. That's just too many resources. Can't handle that many resources. So here was a fascinating study Sheldon Cohen did. And Sheldon Cohen had volunteers, and we could have this conversation in another class. I met Sheldon Cohen. I got to listen to him speak at a brown bag when I was at Carnegie Mellon. And he calls them volunteers, but you better put air quotes around volunteers, because they were basically homeless people, okay? That's what they were. So I was there, I know these things, okay? So anyway, he interviews these volunteers and about stressful experiences in their lives, and then after that, they're given nasal drops that have a cold virus, and then they put them in a hotel, by the way. They follow up with them in a hotel. And so what happens is then, as they're watching them for the next week or two, they're measuring symptoms. Right here, this graph is nice. Percentage of people with colds. But again, I got to hear Sheldon Cohen speak personally, and they didn't just measure people with colds. They measured volume of mucus production. All right, and the point was, the more stressors you have in your life, the more mucus you produce, or as this graph says, more likely you are to have a cold. Okay. So the three main models for understanding stress are the general adaptation model, the life change model, and the transaction model. Okay? And so we're going to look at these things and to understand where stress comes from. The general adaptation model is, I've actually heard this more often referred to as a general adaptation syndrome, but yeah, I guess it's potato. And so there's these 3 stages, and it's best represented by this image. That is, here at this dashed line is sort of like your ability to fight stress. That's your baseline normal level. And so what's going to happen is when you are hit with a stressor, that's what's going to happen at this time right here. A stressor, an extreme event, is now introduced into your environment. There's going to be an immediate decrease right here in the ability to deal with stress. And this is where your body is kicking in the fight or flight mode. This is where fight or flight mode hasn't yet started, but your body's starting to release fat stores. It's starting to convert glucose. It's starting to do these things. Then what's going to happen is as the sympathetic nervous system gets in full gear, our ability to resist stress during the second stage, the resistance stage, is quite high. Okay? However, being in an elevated fight or flight response state is quite costly. And eventually the body just doesn't have any more fat stores to pull from. The body just doesn't have any more resources to draw from. And we go into exhaustion. Okay? And so in exhaustion, you can have burnout. We'll talk about burnout. But in some extreme cases, the body can shut down because the immune system might no longer function. Okay? The life change model is actually interesting, and it argues that stressors, and we already said stress is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a good thing. It can be just fine. But the life change model argues stress, no matter if it's good stress, which is called eustress or distress, right? Whether it is good or bad is quite irrelevant. It takes its toll on our health. And so Holmes and Rahe put together this life change model. And this, what is it called again? The social readjustment rating scale. And so what they did was they quantified what they called life change units. Okay? And so a life change unit is kind of just another way to say stressors, right? And so they said, here are these life events. And what they did was they ranked them in order of how disruptive they are to you. Okay? So the biggest life change was death of spouse. But you take a look, where am I? Gaining a new family member, like having a new baby. All right, nice. Changes, beginning or ceasing formal schooling. Outstanding personal achievement. Look at that. I mean, you got a super duper award. Okay? And so what they did was they went through and they asked people, which of these things has occurred to you in the last year? And then you just kind of circle which ones they've done, and then they add them together. Right? It's a pretty straightforward number. And if you have, over 300 life change units, there was an 80% chance that you will be experiencing illness. If you have 150 to 299 life change units, then. And so it's really a neat idea that good stuff will disrupt us as well as bad stuff. Okay? The transaction model, on the other hand, argues that stress does not reside in the environment. Stress does not reside in the stressor itself. Stress does not reside in the human being. Stress resides in interpretation. Right? And I always like this one. Though I am not a counselor, it reminds me of some of the cognitive approaches to counseling that argue that it's the way that you frame your thinking that is the most important. And so look at this. Let's say, for example, you've got an employee and they're coming up for performance review. Okay? So now, the event itself is not stress. The stressful event, this is a stressor, right? I mean, I ought to have called it a stressor. And so now you need to appraise it. If you appraise it as a threat, oh my God, my manager's going to bust me, I'm in trouble, your response will be to panic or freeze up. Okay? However, if you perceive the appraisal or performance review rather as a challenge, then it brings your resources together. You're focused and you do a good job. Okay, so I like the transaction model, that it's really this appraisal process that really mediates this relationship. So the transaction model, as we said, is this. There's a stressor in the environment, the primary appraisal. Is it a challenge? Can I grow from it? Is it a threat? Okay? If perceived as a threat, then I will have a secondary appraisal and say, though it is a threat, do I have the resources available to deal with the threat? And so we respond to it based on not just is it a challenge or a threat, but do I have resources to deal with it if it is a threat?